Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and I want to set the record straight. Caroline Brouillette, the Executive Director of CANRAC, Climate Action Network of Canada, recently did a video denouncing the Alberta government's plan to run ads across Canada in a $7 million campaign called Scrap the Cap, because CANRAC is involved in promoting the emissions cap, and they've got little caps that have emissions written on them. Emissions cap, get it? These were put together by the Trottier Family Foundation at the last COP meeting, COP 28. And they're also a heavy-duty donor of many other ENGOs. So CANRAC is an organization, an umbrella group of about 150 ENGOs, labor unions, and faith groups in Canada. So it's a massive organization, really. So for her to say that she doesn't have a $7 million budget and therefore she has to do a walk-around video with her cell phone is kind of a joke, isn't it? I mean, first they get $750,000. Well, that's a charity. That's a foundation. So, this means that money has been tax sheltered or tax subsidized, right? And then she's also talking about the fact that this $7 million could go to fund nurses or doctors or hospitals. And curiously, in today's Calgary Herald, the very same argument showed up from the Cape doctors, which are also part of the CANRAC network. So CANRAC has groups like the Canadian Labour Congress, 3 million people strong. They have the Assembly of First Nations that represents 1.2 million Indigenous Canadians, largely funded by the federal government. Then they have CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, which is about 670,000 people strong. And on and on and on like this. All of the ENGOs, the big environmental groups, are part of CANRAC. So for Caroline Brouillette to take on Alberta and mock the $7 million, it's really a joke on her. And it should be a wake-up call for every Canadian, because she's advocating that this $7 million could be getting hospital services and such like, rather than fighting the cap on emissions. Well, if it was used for that, it could only be used once, because once the cap is in place, the emissions cap, then Alberta would be losing $16.2 billion in GDP, and the rest of Canada would lose $2.7 billion in GDP. So if you look at our report by Robert Lyman, which is a summary of a Deloitte report that analyzes the emissions cap, you'll see that everyone in Canada would be a big loser, because oil and gas in Alberta spreads the equalization payments across Canada. That's where the money comes from. Really, it comes from the resource industry, not solely, but largely. So if you don't want $16.2 billion worth of value coming your way in the next while, then go ahead and promote the emissions cap. But I think there should actually be a delusions cap, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I'm looking at their pathways to an equitable future. This is from CANRAC, and they have big plans here. For your money. One of the goals of CANRAC is that Canada should exceed its emissions reduction and exceed its rapid decarbonization goals, which of course Michael J. Kelly, who's a professor of engineering, said that rapid decarbonization in the world would cause mass deaths. Doesn't sound like a good idea to me. They also have this delusional idea that Canada should be involved in a just transition. Well, in fact, the record shows that there's just no transition going on. That we should close the investment gap between climate-related fiscal commitments to reach net zero by 2050. And Since 2019, CANRAC and its membership have advocated for revising the domestic emissions reduction target to 60% below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, they also claim here that Canada's among the world's biggest polluters. That's absolutely false. All you have to do is look at the coal consumption of China and compare it to the rest of the world, or look at China's emissions. Canada emits something like 1.5% of the world's emissions, and China emits at least 30%, perhaps more. CANRAC also wants our nationally determined contribution to commit to cutting GHG emissions by 80% below Canada's 2005 level by 2035. This is absolutely delusional. So what we need is a cap on these kinds of delusions. Oh, and I almost forgot this one. To complement an ambitious domestic target in its new nationally determined contribution, tripling Canada's bilateral climate finance to $15.9 billion between 2026 and 2031 is a critical step toward Canada's fair share of the global effort. That would be almost the equivalent of all the money that would be lost if the emissions cap is passed and put into legislation. So we really do need a delusions cap on these environmental groups, and we need to not have them operating like some kind of a big cartel. In the States, they're now going after the climate cartel, as the House Judiciary Committee calls it, and they're going after them for antitrust violations. So, a lot of these ENGOs that are part of the Climate Action Network are living off your money. They're living off government subsidies at all levels of government. They're living off tax subsidized donations if they're charities. And it's really time that we end these kind of delusional thinkers. Put a cap on delusions. Let's see if the CRA actually can verify that what these people are proposing is a net benefit to the public of Canada in any way at all. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.